This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Ghannam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, we have a great show today. We're going to be covering a lot of things. There have been some dramatic successes with the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctioning of the apartheid regime of Israel. We're going to be talking about Irish author Sally Rooney, who declined to sell her translation of her new award-winning book to be translated into Hebrew to a Israeli publishing company. The Israeli Hasbro machine is going crazy about this, and she's made some very, very impressive statements about that. So we'll be talking about Sally Rooney's decision. We're also going to be talking about a very interesting statement put out by the former Israeli Deputy Attorney General, Yehudit Karp, who basically said it's time to call Israel an apartheid state. Very, very, powerful things. But before we get to that, Jamal, you did a very excellent interview with Israeli filmmaker Avi Mograbi about his new film. It's called The First 54 Years, an Abbreviated Manual for Military Occupation. It's going to shake up the Israeli military and establishment when this comes out. It's quite an impressive film, and you did a really great interview with him.
Yeah, the film by Avi Mograbi, it builds a handbook of the perfect occupier based on testimonies from Israeli soldiers and archive footage. Of course, Avi is one of the founders of Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence is an organization of veteran soldiers who served in the Israeli military since the start of the Second Intifada and have taken it upon themselves to expose the Israeli public to the reality of everyday life in the occupied territories. Their work aims to bring an end to the occupation. I should say that actually Breaking the Silence, I was one of probably the first journalists to interview one of its founders back in 2005. The organization, I think, was founded in 2004. The film is available online in the Middle East, and in the United States, it's been shown or streamed at different film festivals. And the next film festival in the United States for our listeners and viewers, there'll be there is a festival in New York City. It's called the Other Israel Film Festival. So people can go in person and watch the film on November 8th at 8 p.m. if you're in New York, or you can go online and watch it online. There is an online screening November 4th to the 11th. Let's watch Avi. How to succeed in an occupation for at least 54 years. Well, you'll need to watch The First 54 Years, an Abbreviated Manual for Military Occupation, a film by Avi Mograbi, which builds the handbook of the perfect occupier based on testimonies from Israeli soldiers and archive footage. The First 54 Years aims to provide an exclusive insight into the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian people while it's still ongoing. Describing their orders, their missions, and their actions, Israeli soldiers' witnesses report on the mechanisms of the oppression of Palestinians from 1967 to the present day. With these testimonies, they reveal the factory of the occupation machine. Joining us to discuss his film is the writer and director, Avi Mograbi. Avi began his filmmaking career in 1989 with a short film, Deportation, followed by a subsequent large body of films and many awards. He's been teaching documentary and experimental filmmaking in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem since 1999. Avi is also one of the founders of Breaking the Silence, an organization started by ex-Israeli soldiers that works to raise awareness among Israelis of the brutality and injustice Palestinians suffer through their testimonies of personal experience as members of the Israeli military since 2000, occupying Gaza, Hebron, and the West Bank. Welcome to Arab Talk, Avi.
Hi, Jamal. I'm very happy to be at Arab Talk.
First, congratulations on your latest film. Please tell our audience about the idea behind the film and the challenges you faced bringing this idea into fruition.
Okay, well, as you may well know, Jamal, I'm well invested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for many years, and most of my films have to deal with this way or another with the conflict. I've been an activist for many years. I was one of the founders, not only of Breaking the Silence, but also of Yesh Gvul, the first refusist organization that was founded in the beginning of the Lebanon War in 1982. I refused to serve in Lebanon. I was sent to military jail for that. So this is, how shall I say, my favorite occupation, the occupation. So now, Breaking the Silence, that was founded in 2004, has set a time mark of following the actions of the occupation since the year 2000. Their own generation, these are the founders of this organization, are ex-soldiers or veteran soldiers who served during the Second Intifada. So they normally collected testimonies from veterans of their own generation. And lately, 4 or 5 years ago, we at Breaking the Silence decided to expand the timeline and collect testimonies that have to do with the years prior to 2000, from 1967 and on. And we decided to do it as a video project, not knowing exactly how to publish it. And me, as the filmmaker in the board of directors of Breaking the Silence, I took this archive of testimonies and started editing them, trimming them to short stories that so that we at the board of directors could look at this compilation and decide how to publish it. And while doing that, I realized that there was a potential for a larger scope kind of publication than how Breaking the Silence normally publish their collections. Because we normally, when we put on Facebook testimonies, it's 1, 2, 3 testimonies, etc., or we do books and booklets under certain themes. And I saw that I realized that we have collected such a serious collection of testimonies that could help or allow me to create a larger kind of story of the whole occupation. Now, one of the first decisions I made when I started trimming the stories was to concentrate only on actions, procedures, mechanisms, orders, and remove anything that has to do with reflection. I was not interested in the reflections of those who decided to testify, because in every interview, as you may well realize, people talk about what they did, but they also said, they also talked about how they saw it at the time, how in time they changed their mind, how they realized that they had to change a position towards what they did and towards the occupation in general, etc. And I decided to remove all this and not to address it, or to address only the actions. You have beaten your wife. I don't want to know what you thought when you did it or what you thought in the aftermath. I want to hear what you have done. This was the basis that eventually, it took quite a long time in the editing until I got to that, to create a manual for military occupation. If you want to have your own military occupation, I'm your man. I can save you so much time and trouble. You should watch my film or look into my handbook, and success is a given.
Wow. And I know, well, I should ask you, how has overall reception been, even with, and I'm quoting here, the culture loyalty crusaders in Israel? Do you think segment of the Israeli population has been receptive?
Look, the film has had really an immense international success, but not so much in Israel. All foundations, during production, all Israeli cinema foundations rejected it and refused to help fund it. All broadcasters, TV broadcasters in Israel refused to acquire it. And even Israeli film festivals rejected it and didn't present it, which, is not a great position to be, to understand that your community is unwilling to listen to what you have to say. But, well, this is what I'm doing. Now, we have, the film was not banned in Israel. It's allowed to screen in Israel, and it had its a few screenings at the Tel Aviv Cinematheque so far, and other cinematheques will follow. And we have uploaded it to Facebook, restricted only to the Middle East, so it will not damage the international distribution. And people in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, etc., can watch the film freely with Hebrew and Arabic subtitles. We have reached until now more than 150,000 people. It doesn't mean that all of them have seen the film in full, but we are working on that. So basically, the reactions, it's you get comments on Facebook. Some are very encouraging, and some are some I wouldn't want to repeat to your delicate ears. So obviously, this community here is not ready to look at the film or at the mirror when it has to do with the occupation.
Well, that's why I wanted actually to talk about this, because your premise in the film is that the occupation and ethnic cleansing of Palestine has been very methodical and deliberate. Same goes, if somebody reads, for example, Ilan Pappé's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, it becomes very clear that the whole colonization of Palestine was planned far in advance, and there is a method behind it. I mean, and of course your film, it doesn't go as far back as the Nakba, 1948. It starts with the Naksa, which is 1967. Yet you have a lot of parallels between the two, because occupation is occupation. Yet most Israelis seem to be in denial. Even, they're in denial reading a book, but they are also in denial seeing a film with images, with soldiers speaking about their experience. Do you feel, is this going to go on forever, or do you think there's a change of public opinion in Israel?
Well, first of all, indeed, during the Nakba, we didn't complete the job. Israel did not complete the job. The ambition has remained to have maximum land, minimum people. People, I mean non-Jews.
When you mean, I just want to clarify to our audience, when you mean we did not complete the job, you mean did not complete the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the land?
Yes. No, I'm talking, and when I say we, I'm talking about Israel. I am part of this we. What can I do? I mean, but the job was not completed. Many fled Palestine during 1948, but also others stayed. And this is 20% of the present population of the state of Israel. The ambition concerning the occupied territories, meaning the West Bank and Gaza Strip, has not changed. We are working on acquiring maximum land with minimum people, as few Palestinians as possible, because the Palestinian threat to Israel is not a military threat. Is not what they call a terrorist threat. It's a demographic threat. If Israel doesn't maintain its Jewish majority, then the Jewish state of Israel will be gone. And this is why Israel's main goal, number one goal, is to maintain the Jewish majority. And this is why we are keeping 5 million Palestinians under occupation without providing them any civil rights, without allowing them to become citizens, without allowing them to vote and participate in the political game, if you want to call it game, not as in hunting, but game as in playing. Let's hope it's game as in playing. And so now I forgot what the question was. Sorry.
Well. No,
I was carried away with my dissertation.
Well, I mean, I just actually continue on the question because we're seeing, I was saying that there is a lot of parallel between, even though your film begins in 1967, but it also, there is a parallel between what happened during the Nakba, and then you've answered it. You said you did not complete, meaning Israel as an entity. I'm not talking about you personally, but did not complete the job. I mean, in the 21st century, and I'm sure you're aware of this now, the whole idea of the utopian Israel that was created, even in the United States, the vast majority of the Jewish population don't believe that there was the creation of Israel, the land for the people without land, and so forth. It has changed. Human Rights Watch recently said Israel is practicing apartheid. Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, also said the same thing. And that's why I'm asking this question. And then you have your film, which has accurate historical testimonies, and many writers and Israeli writers have written about the subject, yet the process continues. I mean, nothing has changed. The ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarrah continues, in Silwan, and my question is, with all these...
And South Mount Hebron was in the headlines in recent days. Yes, look, I have nothing to promise. There's nothing to expect. The project of cleansing Palestine from Palestinians remains. Yet, I want to say something that is in a way contradictory to that, or not contradictory, but may sound optimistic, although I'm not an optimistic person. I think that 10 years before the end of apartheid, neither you nor me, nor any of our listeners would have imagined that in 10 years, the apartheid will be gone, Mandela will become president, and South Africa will have a restart. I'm not saying that South Africa is a utopian project or that it's that the problems were solved, but let's say that it's possible that when we meet, you and me, in 10 years, we will discuss how come we didn't see that something is changing. Maybe there is an undercurrent that we cannot detect that will surprise us. Let's hope so. This is the least I can say, not the least, the maximum optimism I can share. But I may be also wrong.
Well, no, listen, I'm also an optimist, and I don't know if you know that, but I've been aware of your organization, Breaking the Silence, since 2005, Shovrim Shtika, right? I've actually, in 2005, interviewed Yehuda Shaul in Jerusalem. And then went to an exhibit that you've had in Haifa. They had, after the interview, we interviewed in Jerusalem, went to that exhibit, and he seemed hopeful at the time. I mean, he spoke about his experience serving in Hebron and what made him change his mind when he was given orders to use the Katyusha launcher and just shoot blindly at some noise in the hills.
Not a Katyusha launcher, but a grenade launcher.
A grenade launcher. He called it in Hebrew the miklah, hamiklah.
Yes.
I remember that. So and that's what made him change his mind. And then he was saying there are other soldiers and I was like, oh wow, if the soldiers start saying like yourself, you've said in your interview you refused to serve in Lebanon. I said, well, there is hope because they don't want to be the oppressors. Yet somehow Israel keeps manufacturing new crop of young soldiers who are willing to, they send them to man the checkpoints, the mahsooms and so forth. And it's never ending. So nothing has changed in a way. Things have gotten worse from 2005, a year after Breaking the Silence, which I think it's a great idea. It's a great organization. And nothing has changed. If anything, it has changed to the opposite, to the worse.
This is the Middle East. Every day is worse than the day before. Not only about Israel-Palestine, also if you look at Syria, you look at Lebanon, and I'm sure that also in Egypt, the experience is the same. Look, Breaking the Silence is a very singular phenomenon. I don't think that anywhere in the world at any time when there was a moment where the perpetrators started to testify and tell about what they did while the conflict was still ongoing. It took, in South Africa, it took until apartheid was abolished for the Truth and Resolution Committee to be formed, when people could testify. Algiers was not decoded yet, the French, and it will never be, because those who served in Algeria are scarce. They are dying. They are very old. So in that sense, you can say, yes, it's optimistic. Israel has shown us that we can start confessing on or testifying on the crimes that we have committed in real time. And not in retrospect. Again, you look at reality, and reality doesn't provide any reason to be optimistic. So the only optimism I could squeeze out of myself was this thought about 10 years before the end of apartheid in South Africa that was that nobody could detect that this is what's coming. But I pray, I hope, I dream that this is what will happen. In 10 years, we will be able to discuss our blindness. Hopefully.
I hope so. Yeah, hopefully.
Yes, let's pray.
Yes, absolutely. So I should correct myself. I said the film was banned in Israel. It's not. But what they've been trying to do, you've been basically set aside. You don't receive any government funding for the film, and no festival will show it, right, in Israel, and that's kind of an indirect way of censoring the film. Trying
Absolutely.
to
Self-censorship is the worst of all. Look, there was a huge campaign by the Netanyahu government in its last in the last 4 years on freedom of speech. They didn't succeed in legislating any of the laws, like the loyalty law that you mentioned earlier, but the message was internalized. Programmers, lectors, they have understood what is expected of them. And I was not in any of those meetings of the programmers or lectors that decided to reject my film. But I think I know the state of mind of the people that sat there.
Did you show the films to Palestinians, let's say in East Jerusalem, or Palestinians in in Haifa and so forth? I mean, what's
no, not yet. We are working on it. We do get a lot of reactions of Palestinians on Facebook because we uploaded the film on Facebook with both Hebrew and Arabic subtitles. Then in the comments you can see comments or shares by Palestinians or Facebook people, Facebook members who are with Arabic names, and you realize that it has reached parts of the Palestinian community in Israel. We are planning to do screenings in Nazareth, in Ramallah, in Haifa, but it takes time. First, because the release of the film is not a normal release, it doesn't go on cinemas. It goes either on certain organizations organizing screenings, or in certain sites where you can recruit a public. Then we are only in the beginning of reaching out for the Palestinian community. The film was, like most of my films, was subtitled to Arabic, not in vain. I mean, I have done that because I want to reach out to the Palestinian community. That's clear.
What has surprised you the most now since you've been showing the film in festivals and online? What you will think the most surprising thing that you've received, basically?
Well, I'm not sure it's the most surprising, but something that clarifies also the general Israeli reaction is how it's so easy to look outside rather than to look inside. Introspection is painful. I screened the film in France, and there's a sociology professor, a very prominent, very nice leftist activist, sitting in the crowd and says, "How come you, the Jewish people who suffered so much from what the Nazis have done to you in the Second World War. How can you indulge in doing such horrific things to the Palestinian people? Which is a reasonable question. Have we not learned anything from our own experience? But then I asked him, how come you, the French people, who were also occupied by Germany and have suffered by the Nazis and have suffered immensely from the German occupation, how could you very soon after indulge in Indochina and Algeria the way you did?
Yeah.
One thing I'm very scared of. One day the Palestinian people will be free, and you will have your own state. I hope that you will not find yourself indulging in oppressing another community, because it's terrible. I'm talking about human nature. I'm not talking about Israelis or Palestinians or French or anybody. Human nature. You know that research has shown us that battered children have grown up to be battering parents. This is terrible about us, about what we are, the essence of being a human being. It's terrible.
You know, this is really amazing because, as I said, when I was doing interviews, I also spoke to a woman who was from the Ladies in Black, and she said the same thing. When I asked her this question, and she said, do you know, Jamal, children of who were abused, by,
Yes.
they saw their father abusing their mother, wherever they grow up to do the same thing. When,
Yes.
and I'm like,
How can this happen? What is the lesson that we take from our own experience, our own sad experience, our own oppressed experience? Concerning this, I definitely don't have any answers, but we need to understand something about human nature, about the psychology of the oppressed, not only the psychology of the oppressor.
You're absolutely right. And one final question is how was the reaction of the subjects of the film, the soldiers? I mean, it's one thing doing an interview, and then another thing is later on to watch yourself on the screen being part of this. Have you heard from them?
Yes, obviously, all witnesses received a link to watch the film before it was released. I'm not saying that I'm not sure that all of them did, but I've reached out to all of them before the film was released. Until now, there was only one witness who was so unhappy with the way, with what he has seen, his own testimony, that he has asked me to change the card that is identifying him from his full name to only an abbreviation. But he didn't ask to remove the testimony. And he came to the Tel Aviv premiere, and he I think he had difficulties not with me or with me putting him in a film, but with what he has done. And this has allowed his past to appear, to float, and he had to deal with it. It was not. I don't think. I didn't hear from him since. We're talking about a month ago that the Tel Aviv premiere where he was. So I'm sure that those with the harsher stories, this, it's strange to talk about the oppressor's post-trauma, but post-trauma belongs also to the oppressors, not only to the oppressed. And I'm not saying that it's more important, but and you see some of the witnesses in the film are clearly, you can, I have removed the verbal reflections, but I could not remove the what you see in their eyes or in their body language. And some of them are, like without a psychologist on my side, I can say they're definitely post-traumatic.
The film is The First 54 Years, an Abbreviated Manual for Military Occupation by Avi Mograbi. Avi, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you, Jamal, for having me. It's a privilege.
Wow, that was quite an interview, Jamal, and it's very brave of this filmmaker to go out there and to do a film like this. I mean, the whole foundation of the history of the apartheid regime of Israel is kind of based on this heroic vision of the military, but yet he breaks it down in terms of it's really been built, directed vision based on occupying other people. It's stuff that, I mean, you and I know a lot about this, but there's some information that he spoke about that was even new to me.
Well, it's mostly interviews, with Israeli soldiers who served basically oppressing Palestinians and then had their second thought about it. And some, like, for example, Avi Mograbi, he himself refused to serve in Lebanon and was imprisoned for doing this. And one thing interesting, those now after watching the interview with him, one thing very interesting that he said, because the film, remember, starts really talking about the occupation since 1967, which is the Nakba. Doesn't go all the way back to 1948, which is the Nakba, even though through these testimonies and there are a lot of parallels with the ethnic cleansing, oppression, etc. And I asked Avi, like, what was the intention, etc. They pick up from there. But then he says, well, and that doesn't mean himself, but he says kind of the Israeli Institute or whatever, they said they did not complete the job in 1948.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's the Israeli institution has not completed the job, meaning, 1967.
The job of occupation. Right.
Occupation and ethnic cleansing. Really.
Exactly.
That's he was very clear about that.
Well, it's a really excellent documentary. We're encouraging our viewers and our listeners to take a look at it online, or if they're in New York, they can go see it in person. But this is yet another piece of the puzzle of disabusing the kind of Israeli hasbara, historical hasbara on this myth, the mythology of the Israeli military being this heroic, enterprise, when in fact it's been in this total service of occupying Palestinians, ethnically cleansing them. And so it's a really impressive look at that, which most Americans, I would say, probably have no idea about the full depth of the kind of the ugly side of the Israeli military, to put it mildly.
Well, on the same topic, Zionists who support apartheid, Israel, and their surrogates are having a very bad week, Jess.
It's a bad week, Jamal. It's a bad week for Israeli apologists. It's a very bad week.
So the show focuses on this. I mean, it happened as a coincidence when we actually organized the interview with Avi Mograbi. But this week, as you know, and as you said early on, Irish novelist, acclaimed, I should say, Irish novelist Sally Rooney said on Tuesday that she would not allow the Israeli publishing house that handled her previous novels to publish her most recent book. It's called Beautiful Word, Where Are You? Because of her support for Palestinian people and the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. She also added that she knew that some would disagree with her decision, and I'm quoting here, but I simply do not feel it would be right for me under the present circumstances to accept a new contract with an Israeli company that does not publicly distance itself from apartheid and support the United Nations stipulated rights of the Palestinian people.
It's a very strong statement, Jamal. I think people need to know about Sally Rooney. She's not just any novelist and any writer. She's an internationally renowned, recognized, award-winning novelist who is beloved all over the world, not just in Ireland, but in the United States and beyond. So her statement is compelling, it's strong, and it's someone like this who gives a full-throated response and support for BDS that really makes Israelis, who support the apartheid regime and the apartheid practices quiver, because she's so reasonable. Her statement is so powerful. Her writing is so clear and beautiful. This is exactly the kind of person who supports the BDS that is a nightmare for the Israeli Hasbaristas, as you call them, or the Israeli apologists. What do you do with such a thoughtful, person like Sally Rooney? It's hard to criticize anything that she said in her statement. By the way, she also said, Jamal, if she found somebody outside of the apartheid state of Israel who would publish it in Hebrew, she might even consider it, but there's no way that she would do that. And again, full-throated, full support for the BDS movement. This is really, as you said, and I agree, it's a really bad day for the apartheid regime. It's a bad week. They're having a very bad week.
Just to be clear, Sally Rooney is not the first prominent author to decline an offer to publish in Israel.
Right.
Alice Walker said in 2012 that she would not allow a Hebrew translation of her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Color Purple. Everyone knows The Color Purple, Jess. Alice Walker, who was born in Georgia in 1944, said at the time, and I'm quoting here, "I grew up under American apartheid, and this," she added, "of Israel's treatment of Palestinians was far worse."
Yeah, well, that's what Desmond Tutu also said about Israeli apartheid. And Desmond Tutu, lived under brutal apartheid practices of apartheid South Africa. He said the same thing. So the other thing that Sally Rooney did, and I think you mentioned this, Jamal, but it's important to put it out there. She referenced Bet Salem. She referenced Human Rights Watch. She's saying this, I'm looking at what the rest of the world is saying about the apartheid regime, and we're fully in support of, Palestinian rights for freedom and self-determination. So I think the Hasbaristas, Jamal, are probably not just nervous, but they're going to have to rework their strategy because they're losing on the international front. They're losing on the international stage. By the way, the Israeli foreign minister is visiting the United States and is meeting with Nancy Pelosi today. And so you can tell that this nervousness about reaching out and kind of wanting to maintain the facade of, great relations, Nancy Pelosi is walking a big tightrope now, especially with the progressive elements of the Democratic Party, because everybody knows what's happening in the apartheid regime right now. So it's kind of an interesting time politically.
Well, we said this last time, that every time Israel tries and its allies try to whitewash their crimes, something shows up. I mean, we said this has been a bad week. It has been a bad year. I mean, if you think about the year and you talk about starting with B'Tselem, the Israel's human rights organization, to Human Rights Watch itself saying, hey, guys, and it's a whole big publication over 200 pages long discussing all the actions of Israel and why they're coming to the conclusion that its practices represent apartheid. And then, as you know, they go on the attack and they try to demonize Human Rights Watch and demonize B'Tselem and demonize anyone from, let's say, you mentioned the progressive element within Congress, like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and etc. And then something else happens, and then here we go. And I said, this is the week. And then you have a very famous author, makes it very clear. And also, and this is a case, just here's a case of if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. And this is the other story of the week, which is the time has come to admit Israel is an apartheid regime. That's an article in Haaretz by Yehudit Karp, and she's not anyone. Yehudit Karp was the former deputy attorney general of the state of Israel.
Exactly.
And she writes a whole long article, illegal. Actually, that illegal scholar would argue this is not an emotional article. This is a legal article, Jess.
Yeah, and listen, this is not a Palestinian or someone from the European Union writing a legal analysis about the apartheid practices of the state of Israel. This is nothing like that. This is someone who is a former, assistant attorney general, who's from the belly of the beast, who saw the operation of apartheid up close and personal on a daily basis. And for her to write this kind of article, adding insult to injury to the bad week that the Israelis are already having, this is pretty compelling. Now, Haaretz, Jamal, is kind of known for being very, I won't say progressive, because you can't use the word progressive with anything in the Israeli, scope of things, but they are known for being somewhat balanced and presenting, ideas that are different from the other Israeli media. So the fact that this would be published in Haaretz and gain such notoriety is a very big deal. I'm kind of interested in what you think about this, Jamal, because for me, it's always about timing. You had Human Rights Watch, you had B'Tselem. By the way, you forgot Ben and Jerry's in terms of the bad year that the Israelis are having. Then you have Sally Rooney. And then you have all this anxiety about the Israelis, coming, with their new elections and then relationship with the Biden administration. For this article to be published now speaks to some movement within some elements of the Israeli society that time has come to kind of face reality. I mean, is that your sense, or am I just more optimistic?
No, I think you're right. I think it's snowballing. I mean, you cannot keep hiding, all these atrocities indefinitely. And you forgot to mention, and I forgot to mention also, the marches in Jerusalem and the chants "Death to Arabs" that millions and millions of people saw, right? So this is all that's happening, and there is a famous person, and I won't quote, but he said, "At some point, you cannot shine third." That's making saying it lightly. I mean, how long can you keep hiding the crimes of and the atrocities of the Israeli regime? How long can you keep denying that what's happening on the ground is apartheid? I mean, how long? And I want to actually read some of her legal argument, because I said this is a legal argument.
Let's do that.
And then she says, this is just the end. She said, therefore, in practice, the High Court of Justice in Israel provided a legal seal of approval for the existence of two separate legal systems in the same geographic area under a single government. One is privileged for the Jewish citizens of the ruling authority who live in the region, as opposed to international law, and whose human rights are protected, and the other discriminatory, oppressive, and draconian for those being ruled. Residents of the regions who are identified based on different national or ethnic affiliation. That is, and that's her last sentence, that is the elephant that is in the room under the aegis of the High Court, and with the granting of a specific seal of approval by the Israeli court. The time has come to call a spade a spade. An apartheid regime is the name given in international law by the international community to a regime of the type that Israel is maintaining in the occupied territories. And what I'm saying here, what makes it different. It's very compelling. Yeah, what makes it difference, she's basically a legal scholar, and she's using the legal argument.
Yeah, it's a legal argument. She's a former, assistant attorney general, the highest, part of the department, the highest legal department within the Israeli kind of system of justice. I say that in quotes. But for someone from the inside to point out that kind of analysis is very compelling. The anxiety that is kind of this is engendering in Tel Aviv right now is pretty extensive. I want to just say something. I don't know if you caught this, but as I mentioned, the Israeli foreign minister's meeting with Nancy Pelosi today will probably take a meeting with Blinken a little bit later. In a press conference this morning, one of the reporters asked the Israeli foreign minister, if the United States asks you to open the American consulate in Jerusalem, would you do it? He got very flustered. He said, absolutely not. I mean, and again, you could see the kind of pushback and the kind of, changes within the, even in the media here in the United States, pushing back on the Israeli Hasbarista or Israeli narrative about how things are. I found that kind of unusual. I don't remember the last time U.S. media was able to ask such tough questions of an Israeli foreign minister so publicly.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll keep asking more tough questions because I think this whole trip again, you've mentioned meetings with Blinken, etc., but I know this is probably the most important meeting for the foreign ministers to have with AIPAC. So they'll come up with a new strategy and their surrogates in Congress. Because, every time something like this happens, you have all these apologists, as you've mentioned, who will try to defend. And I mean, this is crazy because like what I'm saying, they attacked Human Rights Watch. I mean, this is like one organization that's supposed to protect the entire population on Earth and human rights. They'll say, oh, no, they're biased. And then they attack an Israeli organizations like B'Tselem. They'll even go into attacking now this former deputy attorney general of Israel. They'll say something bad about her. I mean, it's just there is no end to their argument and attack. And one thing I've noticed, when they start when their backs to the wall, one argument they'll always fall trying to defend apartheid in Israel and the atrocities. Do you know what's that argument, Jess?
Well, the anti-Semitism argument?
That's always the case. That's kind of like the easy one to go to. But no, there is another one now they use. It's the whataboutism.
What about?
Yeah, whatever you mention, they'll start going, what about China? What about what's happening in China to the Muslims in China? Why you're criticizing Israel? What about Iran? What about what's happening in the Ukraine? So this is the whataboutism argument. That's when they run out of every single argument.
But Jamal, we have a really good argument for that. Here's the whataboutism. We don't give Iran $3 billion a year. We don't give China $3 billion a year in military aid. We don't have special relationships where our intelligence services share information with Israeli intelligence services. So it's a bogus argument about whataboutism. And the fact is, the walls of protection internationally to protect Israeli illegal practices, immoral, illegal practices of occupation and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the walls are beginning to crumble, Jamal. And even though this is a marathon, I think we just went from mile 1 to mile 2 with what happened this week.
Well, it has been a bad week for Hasbaristas. It has been a bad week for Israel surrogates in Congress and across the globe. And we didn't even get to what happened in London, in England, and other places.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that hopefully next week. You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, and download any show that you have missed.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.